Time now for Media Watch, and James Creedon joins me here in the studio. Hi there,
Hi,
James.
Tom.
Let's begin in London because a group of journalists walked out of Downing Street today. They were at a press briefing, but one of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's aides made it clear that perhaps some reporters weren't terribly welcome. What actually happened?
Well, you can see a photograph here, Tom, of the senior communications aide to Boris Johnson called Lee Kane. He's photographed here alongside Dominic Cummings, who is the much better known senior advisor. Now, they decided at this press briefing at Downing Street, which was on the topic of negotiations about a new trade deal with the EU, that certain journalists would be given that briefing and others were basically being excluded. Now, that is completely against protocols, completely against tradition when it comes to how the press are treated in a democracy. Number 10's what would you say, explanation was, we are welcome to brief whoever we want and whenever we want. So there was there was certainly no apology coming from Downing Street. Now, a lot of journalists and others were taking to social media saying, so it begins. Is this kind of, in other words, is this a new culture in terms of how the government is going to interact with the press? It's only day 4, says another. Number 10 has just tried to offer selective briefing to approved journalists. Some even talking about the end of a free press, death knell of democracy, I suppose, certainly taking it to the nth degree. Now, these are a couple of the journalists who were actually there. Tom, Pippa Crerar of the Daily Mirror said, my last word on this, I felt deeply uncomfortable being left to stand on one side of the room while colleagues' names were read out one by one, and they then joined the group that was deemed acceptable. This is Paul Waugh of the Huffington Post, also excluded. And he says in 22 years of being a political journalist, he'd never experienced anything like it. Now, what else is there to say on this? Well, I suppose one key point is a lot of other journalists actually walked out in solidarity with their colleagues. So even if they had been the privileged few who were going to be present for this briefing, BBC, ITV, the Daily Mail, Telegraph and the Times, those journalists walked out in protest. A lot of people saying that this is the kind of solidarity that is the best way to combat blatantly illiberal politics. Opposition MPs such as Dan Carden of the Labour Party said that this was a wake-up call to everyone who believes the press should hold power to account. So lots of remarks such as that, and many, Tom, also evoking the US president, who has notoriously been very selective in terms of the press that he prefers to talk to. So some headlines even there talking about Boris Johnson using Trump tactics to avoid press scrutiny. So a lot of criticism for that today online.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds decidedly Trumpian. And when I saw that list of people that walked out in solidarity, plus you add to them the names of the people that got told they weren't welcome, can't have been many people left in the room for that press briefing.
Indeed, absolutely.
Let's move on to another story you've picked out for us. The horror novelist Stephen King. I used to quite enjoy his books when I was younger. He's deleted his Facebook account because of false information in political advertising. What's this about?
That's right. So this is kind of the latest in a series of very high-profile people speaking out about Facebook not doing anything to fact-check political advertising, which is, of course, rife with bias and even false information, misinformation. So Stephen King, he took to Twitter. He clearly has a favouring now for this particular social network, saying that he's quitting Facebook. He's not comfortable with the flood of false information that's allowed in its political advertising, nor am I confident in its ability to protect its users' privacy. Now, some responded to that by saying thank you and using the hashtag delete Facebook. Now, this comes just a few days after George Soros wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times where he was very, very critical of Mark Zuckerberg, and he even sort of intimated that their interests, the interests of Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg, are aligned. The president's in winning elections, Mr. Zuckerberg's in making money. Now, the point he's making is that political advertising that has misinformation in it is often more controversial. As a result, there's more interaction with ads like that, people commenting on it in critical manner or whatever. And because of Facebook's algorithms, these ads that have misinformation and false information actually get more visibility and more traction. Now, that's something that the comedian, Sacha Baron Cohen pointed out as well on Facebook recently. 218,000 political ads on Facebook, many with lies and hate, seen by voters perhaps 1.3 billion times, and Facebook profits. Now, there's even an internal memo that went around Facebook recently that got a certain amount of publicity by this Facebook executive, who more or less said, he said that Facebook essentially did help Donald Trump win the 2016 election. But he said it was not just because of Facebook algorithms, it was also because of the kind of advertising campaign that Donald Trump ran. So in other words, misinformation and the sort of approach to publicity and advertising that Donald Trump has, combined with Facebook algorithms, is a very potent mix. But certainly for those who value information that is not full of falsehoods, they're saying we've had enough deleting Facebook.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you for today's edition
Tom.
of Media Watch. James Creedon.